Buongiorno, mi sentite?
Sì,
Grazie, grazie. Carica.
Allora, ciao a tutti, buonasera.
buonasera.
Salve Matilde anche. Vi chiedo a voi che siete entrati per ultimi, c'è Gabriele e Matilde, se potete cliccare sul pulsante che c'è in fondo sul menu, c'è un globo con scritto interpretazione. Se cliccate sul globo avete due canali che sono italiano e inglese, scegliete l'italiano così le traduttrici possono tradurvi.
Siamo in italiano noi?
Sì, come preferisci, basta che la lingua sia una sola, quindi se clicchi su italiano continua a parlare italiano per tutta la conferenza, oppure in inglese e basta che clicchi sul canale in inglese.
Ok, grazie.
Buongiorno a tutti, ciao Matilde, ciao Iacopo, ciao Alberto,
Ciao Gabriele.
ciao Valérie, ciao Maddalena.
Chiedo a Enrico e Gabriella se sentite tutto, se è tutto bene nei canali.
Finora sì, stiamo sentendo bene. Mi-
Sì, sono nel canale inglese, va bene.
Madda, ti ricordi solo di mandarmi il link del prossimo...
Certo.
Dove me lo mandi?
WhatsApp?
Brava.
Allora, spiego a tutti, alle 18 andremo in streaming su YouTube e le persone inizieranno a entrare in questo webinar come partecipanti. Gabriele farà un'introduzione generale sul tema della conferenza, sul fatto che ci stiamo approcciando alla Slow Wine Fair. A seguire ci sarete voi con i vostri speech e poi intanto io nella chat insieme a Martina, che è qui vicino a me, e raccoglieremo anche le domande. Le domande raccolte, se ci saranno, l'ultima conferenza che abbiamo fatto lo scorso mercoledì, molte persone hanno fatto domande, quindi le indirizzerò a Gabriele. dove tu preferisci, se preferisci su WhatsApp direttamente o mi dici dove sono visibili a tutti, però nel caso ce ne fossero tanti ti faccio una selezione su quelle più interessanti.
Su WhatsApp va benissimo.
Perfetto. E quindi direttamente le persone non possono parlare, ma scriveranno nella chat di gruppo, così da farvi le domande. Se avete dei materiali da condividere, vi prego, io ho ricevuto soltanto il materiale di Valérie, se avete altri materiali da condividere, di direttamente condividere lo schermo voi stessi. Così vi chiederei, per ormai mancano 10 minuti, però se avete dei materiali di inviarmeli. Non so se Iacopo, Alberto, Matilde avete dei materiali. Ok, quindi semplicemente dopo il discorso raccogliere le domande e insomma a seconda del tema chi sente più. Gabriele, passerà la parola a uno di voi. E vi ringrazio molto di essere venuti qua oggi.
Hello, Valerie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
The interpreters have a question for you. Can you please avoid using acronyms all the time, because sometimes they don't match the Italian acronyms. So try to explain them at least the first time you mention them.
Okay, I
We're
take
going
note.
through your presentation and there are many acronyms.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, I will try not to use acronyms. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
C'è Gabriella che parla con Valérie. Bene, io mi taccio e insomma lascio la parola a Gabriele se vuoi ripetere la scaletta o qualche tema. Chiedo anche alle traduttrici se l'audio va bene per tutti, se c'è bisogno di cuffie, commentate liberamente. E io mi taccio, sarò dietro le quinte, nel caso ci sia qualsiasi tipo di problema io sono qui. Grazie a tutti.
No, non tacere, Maddalena, ci stavamo divertendo. Vabbè, insomma, non sto a replicare tutti i discorsi che abbiamo fatto
I
insieme.
will not go through all the housekeeping information. Let me remind you of our agenda. First speaker will be Alberto Grandi, second one, Valérie Dufour, then Matilde Poggi, and last but not least, Iacopo di Teodoro. This is the order of speakers that we had decided and that we had agreed upon in our individual calls. Each one of you has 15 minutes. And then I will let you speak without interrupting you, so you can go through everything you have to say without any interruptions. Then, based on, you know, the time frame and or you know, anything coming to mind, I may decide to make an observation or ask a quick question, but I'd rather not to. I would rather have a Q&A to be held at the end of the session. As Maddalena said, at the end of the previous conference, we had many questions and comments, so the Q&A and the exchange should be left at the end of the session, if you all agree with me.
Sure. Yes, sure.
We have 1.5 hours for the conference, and Enrica and Gabriella will be with us for the whole period. So keep it in mind and stay within your time limits. At 7:30, we'll be concluding our call. So I set myself, you know, just for that time frame. I haven't set myself any time frame. I haven't capped the length of my presentation, so you will have to leave the call if I'm, you know, dragging it on for too long. I'm not really good at that, to stay within time limits. But anyway, try and do your best. Well, please mute yourselves when not speaking. So just activate your microphones when you take the floor. I can mute all of you, being the host of the call. Should we leave our webcams on? Yes, please do. So at the end, with a webinar mode, we'll be able to see you only at the top of the screen and follow your presentations. We'll stay connected till the end for the Q&A, so you'll be able to be seen by everyone on the call. I think you can go ahead, Valerie, and ask your question. We can't hear you. Is
okay.
your mic on?
Now it's on.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
okay, I have just a little question because I will be sharing a PowerPoint presentation. May I try now to see if it displays well on the screen, if we have time? Is it
Sì.
possible?
Sì, Valeria, abbiamo 5 minuti.
Yes, of course, we have 5 minutes. So you can go ahead and share your presentation.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Yes.
If I go from the beginning, do you see one-page presentation? Yes, it seems?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Then I will be, okay, doing like this. Okay, so now I stop sharing. And thank you for letting me try. Okay.
Thank you. Tra un minuto partiamo. Grazie a tutti. Gli iscritti al momento sono 350.
For the time being, we have 350 registered participants.
Io non sto sentendo nessun audio, eh.
Nemmeno io.
Buonasera, buonasera a tutte, buonasera a tutti, benvenuti.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our conference. This online conference is included in a series organized in the framework of the Slow Wine Fair and the Slow Wine Coalition. The Slow Wine Fair will be held in Bologna on February 26th to the 28th. So it's just a few days to go, and there will be many wine growers coming from all over Italy and all over the world, showcasing their wines and networking and discussing topics related to wines. My name is Gabriele Rosso. I'm the deputy editor of Slow Wine Guide. And this session is titled Denominations, a Common Good. On February 27th, at the same time, there will be another online conference titled Bio e Vita. It will be about organic winemaking at all levels. So if you're interested at all, please don't hesitate and register on the Slow Wine Fair website. So this session is about denominations. And before giving the floor to our speakers that I'll introduce to you shortly, let me briefly explain why we decided to pick this topic and give the conference this title. It all started with the presentation of the Italian edition of Slow Wine in Milan in January 2022. And at that presentation, a debate was organized on the theme of denominations, as if it were the first chapter of a long way to go. And that debate was focused on the Italian dimension of denominations. And then we have Iacopo was one of the speakers, is a wine expert and a well-known journalist. Matilde Poggi was there on that occasion, and she's with us today as well, and I'll introduce her to you. And Angelo Peretti, who's another journalist and wine specialist. On that occasion, we talked about denominations from an Italian viewpoint and looking at Europe, and that was Matilde Poggi's contribution, while focusing whether to have denominations or not, and natural wines sometimes the well-established trends are not always kept to. And then there was a discussion about the wine tasting commissions or committees. That initiative was very successful. There was a lot of interest among wine growers. And then we thought it might be a good idea to keep talking about it, while trying to expand our discussion to include other countries, going beyond the boundaries of Italy, going beyond the world of wine. and looking at denominations, what they actually mean over and above the wine sector. For this reason, we decided to organize another meeting on the same subject and expand our approach. We invited 4 speakers, and I will introduce them to you in the rundown order somehow, and I'm sure they will have to expand our approach. The first speaker is Professor Alberto Grandi, a writer and associate professor, teaches history of European integration and has taught economic history and food history at the University of Parma. In 2018, he wrote a book for Mondadori publishers called Denominations of Invented Origin. So we'll have the opportunity to understand what he meant by invented origin. Then second speaker will be Valérie Dufour from the Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development of the European Commission. And she will explain and tell us something more about the European approach and the reforms and proposals being discussed at the European level on the theme of denominations and winemaking. And then we'll give the floor to Matilde Poggi, who is a die-hard participant of our meetings because they're always with us, and we're very pleased to have you. She's the president of the Confédération Européenne de Vignerons Indépendants and wine grower, and a wine grower herself. So she's here as an official representative of CEVI, but also as a farmer and a wine producer. And then last speaker will be Iacopo di Teodoro, the distributor and a wine expert, especially on the US market. Name of his business is Artisanal, Cellars. I hope I haven't forgotten anything, and that I have correctly introduced our speakers. And so I will immediately cut the chase and give the floor to Alberto Grandi. Let me make a short introduction from my viewpoint and our viewpoint. The theme of denomination is extremely important. It's a multifaceted topic, and wine experts do know that denominations are important in terms of providing guarantees to consumers. Regulations are experienced as instruments meant to allow consumers to know what wine they're drinking, what food they're eating, and that everything was manufactured according to the rules, so that they are guaranteed that food and wine were produced in the right way. In Italy, the theme of denominations has taken up more importance. Back in 1986, there was the so-called methanol scandal, if you remember about that. So the wines with denomination in people's imagination could somehow be considered as more important and guaranteed somehow, because consumers felt betrayed by the winemakers. So denominations as guarantees for consumers and also for winemakers and vine growers as means to promote their own wines, their brands, and their territories. And here Alberto can certainly have a say. Alberto, in fact, in his book, talks about denominations also in a very critical way and scientifically founded, because there's a lot of research that Alberto has actually carried out on this topic, and about how denominations are not always completely to be relied upon in tracking the legitimacy, the history of a territory, or the history of a product. So sometimes they're a bit imaginative, if I'm allowed to use this word. So without further ado, Alberto, I'll give the floor to you. In your book, there are a couple of chapters about wine, more specifically, Marsala and Dolcetto. So over to you, Alberto. Thank you very much, Gabriele. As mentioned before, I feel privileged and embarrassed at the same time because I'm not a wine expert. So I feel a bit at odds being here with you today. Well, I know a little bit about everything you can eat and drink, but I'm not a wine expert. So I feel ill at ease because it's a challenging world. I prepared a kind of rundown in my head, and based on your introduction, I will have to change everything, and as it often happens to me. I will talk about wine just a little bit, but I need to tell you that whatever I'm going to tell you originates from wine. When Europe, in 1992, there was Regulation 2081, introduced DOP and IGP, had the wine model as a model to be followed and applied to all food, agri-food products. I always like to remember that, well, I always tell the story the way the European Community of Coal and Steel was established in Stresa, and Europe was made out of cheese rather than coal and steel. And this is a nice story that I always like to mention. There are a few things that I would like to focus on. Sometimes I may turn unpleasant when talking about denominations or collective brands. So my first point is that when Europe introduced DOP and IGPs, had a number of goals, which was protecting certain productions that were deeply rooted in a given territory and that could be challenged by the single market because they could be easily imitated. So there was a need to have uniform labeling policies and guarantee and quality control policies. And also the importance of food in the European economy. Food systems were considered as important from an economic viewpoint and that to be protected and upheld somehow, and then avoiding a sort of a far west situation. So each country could implement promotion, protection, and labeling tools that were different. So at that point, consumers would have found it hard to distinguish one product from the other. So there was a need to support different chain systems while at the same time protecting consumers, making consumers' lives easier, helping them know what they were buying at the store when they bought, food or wine with a given denomination, which was DOP and IGP. So they were the DOC and DOCG, or the other way around, actually. So IGP being actually DOC. As an historian, I'd like to remind you that this idea whereby a denomination has to be created or a denomination has to be created for the benefit of the consumer It's an old idea. It dates back to a long time ago. If you happen to read Apicius' recipes, it was a cook working in ancient Rome in between before and after Christ. You will realize that everything was denominated. The origin, the indication of origin is fundamentally important. To guarantee products quality, so the different wines came from different places, and in their very names, they contained a guarantee for the consumer. This is certainly an important point wherever a globalized market exists. It did make sense in imperial Rome, because in the rest of the world, everyone consumed what they produced, and there was no need to name them. Everyone knew the quality and the variety of products they could consume. So zero-mile products were obvious and necessary. So when you start having medium to long distance trade, then you need to guarantee the final consumers that may live a long way from where the product is actually manufactured. So that's the main issue. When in the Middle Ages, everything was localized and fragmented, and things changed, and I cannot get into that historical period. It would be extremely complicated, but allow me to say something as an historian. I always like to mention that up until the Industrial Revolution, and especially for a country like Italy, which boasts excellence in so many areas and many denominated products, the very opposite happened. Quality came from far away, because it was the lords that could afford consuming products that came for a long way, while the poor farmers had to consume zero-mile products. So its denomination did have that kind of an impact, especially in a country like Italy. Probably in France, things were different. So that's the underlying rationale. And the critical aspect for a country like Italy, probably the rest of Europe too, but for Italy, that becomes kind of pathological, because there are quite a few things that don't work. We have kind of distorted a number of important elements and goals that were channeled to completely different goals, which were not meant to be originally. So the mechanism was not operated as it was originally meant to. So in Italy, the denomination does no longer have its original goals. Apparently does, but not in the substance. And it's actually the arrival point of a process aimed at defending local productions, pride, political banners, and other motivations. This is quite visible in the wine sector and in so many other sectors and other Italian products with denomination, both DOP and IGPs, whose critical mass or the production value as such wouldn't account for or wouldn't allow supporting the whole of the European policy. I'm talking about important products that are quite well known, like Castelluccio's lentils, 2.5 million of turnover in total. So and the pear from Mantua, so 3 million euros of turnover. Barzi's salami, 2.5 million. 3, 4 manufacturers, 30 up to 30 manufacturers sharing this kind of a turnover. Well, of course, that wouldn't justify that cost, the cost of denomination. You need to have a consortium, a certifying body, and so on and so forth, and there's no immediate return on the investment. Of course, it's an identity-driven effort, and we may want to discuss about it. In Italy, we have distorted the original instrument, which was originally positive. We distorted it and adapted to other political political interests. I always ask the organizers if I can get into politics a little bit. Another important issue, for instance, is that Italy got a bit carried away by inventing many additional labels, DECO, PATs, where the Ministry of Agriculture was directly involved. And I always tell the story of tiramisu. I don't know if you know about it. The Ministry of Agriculture recognized the tiramisu from Friuli, which is a northern region of Italy, and that wreaked havoc. In fact, the Veneto region complained, challenged that, and he said he had to defend the interest of 4.5 million people from Veneta who challenged the official recognition of tiramisu as originated in Friuli. I don't know how their interest could be jeopardized, but never mind. There's a kind of identity-driven dimension there that goes well beyond the very support, the economic support and consumers' protection. So, which is no longer a relevant issue. So this is the malfunctioning aspect, if I can say that. Then, when it comes to discussing this issue of denominations, well, some denominations do make sense, quite a few of them, and I tend to be pessimistic when talking about the systems, but there are very many success stories, such as the Parmigiano Reggiano, Grana Padano, the Prosecco, talking about wines. And then, of course, there are distortions there as well, but I'm not going to get into them as I'm not an expert. And another well-known success story, similar to that of Prosecco, is the balsamic vinegar, which is IGP from Modena. It's an industrial product, totally invented, that has a denomination and name having been recognized by Europe and not being rooted in that territory, even though it bears Modena in the name, but there's no link. It's just an hypothesis, hypothetical, with the old traditional vinegar, DOP, one from Modena and one from Reggio Emilia, that doesn't have anything to do with the one we get at the store. Of course, the original one had been extremely unaffordable, and this one is totally affordable and with a good margin for manufacturers. Compared to non-balsamic classic Venera. And this is a success story of the last 40 years. It's become one of the most important success stories being exported all over the world. So denominations do work when this kind of strong economic pressure is present. And people are able to attack the market. The Piadina Romagnola is another case, the Piadina from the Romagna region. So it's very deeply rooted in that territory. So there are so many success stories that cannot be denied. But in some cases, the denomination doesn't work. It's a case, it's often abandoned. by producers and manufacturers. And going back to wines, the Super Tuscany are former Chianti producers that left the denomination and invented non-denominated wines that are amazingly successful on the global market at prices that I cannot unfortunately afford. Bulgari is now denominated, so that's, you know, that's the way the market tends to evolve. There are lots of malfunctioning elements, but very many success stories that have certainly an impact on our country's economy. So what are the critical points? Well, the idea that this country, when taking up the denomination system, it was considered as an alternative to the industrial system. So as the strong identity denominations are the reflections of an idea of development of the country, which is based on agri-food and tourism. This is a very long idea that will take this country to an inevitable and irreversible decline, because actually countries living on tourism and food are not rich. All the way around, they're terribly poor. So I do wish a country to produce and manufacture very good products, but without relying 100% on that, on food and tourism. But I see this approach looming large. And then another important issue which has emerged over the last few years, for instance, talking about the Parma ham, there were some scandals on certain pig breeds that couldn't be used. So the idea that there can be development with no research and innovation, the product is crystallized, is frozen. That's the way it has to be made, and there's no other way. So when you have fixed regulations, that's the inevitable result. Regulations do have equality. They get rid of low quality products, but they're very rigid, and sometimes certain productions are left out. And so no attempt is made at improving the quality of products. So an example I always use is going from Comédie de l'Art to Goldoni's comedy. Goldoni took the Commedia dell'Arte, where actors improvised and started writing scripts. With the Commedia dell'Arte, there was a lot of invention and creation, but it often happened that actors were not particularly inspired that day, and the comedy turned out to be not very funny, but with a script that didn't happen because they had to use the very words that somebody else had written. So Goldoni's comedy was very successful throughout Europe too, whereas the Commedia dell'Arte was somehow forgotten, set aside. So the innovative power of actors was stifled somehow. This is what we're actually doing with our strict regulations. We get rid of low quality products, but at the same time, we give up innovation and improvisation and adapting products to ever-changing raw materials. That's another risk. The last risk is that we may end up with a system losing any contact with the territory it comes from. Like the methanol scandal, And when the Italian wine production actually changed thanks to denominations, so you have to rely a lot on reputation. That's the key. That's the final goal of denomination, giving a reputation, recognizing reputation. So whenever you create too many reputations, the system is experiences inflation. When there's too much money around, it's not worth much. When there are too many denominations, automatically they will lose most of their meaning. And so the products are still popular, that would be popular anyway, Prosecco, Parmigiano, and so on and so forth. And everything else coming up later runs the risk of becoming useless or never reaching a critical mass because there's no margin and it doesn't sell enough. Am I being long enough? Have I been too long? Have I stayed within my time limits? So I never know if my time is up or have I been too unpleasant or too negative. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, of course, I'm here to answer them. Thank you very much for your presentation, Alberto. As you said, you opened up, you know, our horizons. You introduced many different topics. You started by saying that you're not a wine expert, but what you actually said has a lot to do with the world of wine and can help us broaden our horizons. As you said, and of course there will be a question at the end. I've been told told off by the organizers that I didn't repeat that at the end of the conference we'll have time for questions. So if you have any questions, please use the chat on Zoom. And then, of course, questions will be asked to the different speakers. So thank you very much, Alberto. I will now move on to the next speaker.
The next speaker will be by Valérie Dufour. What Professor Grandi told us is that denominations from the political standpoint are interpreted in a certain way, and it is necessary that the institutions and policymakers use denominations in a sensible way, if I may say so. And this actually is very much the case, and it's time to hand it over to Valérie Dufour, who works within the European Commission on these issues. So over to you, Valérie, for your talk.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. I hope you can hear me and see me. I will just share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation for you. So here we are. Sorry if I look blue, it's because of a screen light, so I hope it will be better. So first of all, I would like, good evening everyone, and I would like to thank the organizers of Slow Food for giving me the opportunity to present the legislative proposal that we have at EU level. And also I would like to thank the interpreters for making me sound good to you in a way. So I will try to stick to my 15 minutes presentation, and for this reason I would have to go quite quickly over some slides, but let's see if we can bring already some replies or some connections with the previous presentation. So this would be a proposal for a regulation on European geographical indications for wine, spirit drinks and agricultural products, also on quality schemes for agricultural products. So that means all sectors included, just one regulation. But before I go to the core of a discussion of a legislative proposal, I would like to say a few introductory words. Geographical indications indeed protect the products' names. They are in intellectual property rights. So we have currently nearly 3,500 names registered in the EU. So these are in fact designating products with a special link to the place of production, owing to their characteristics or reputation. Then we have a second kind of products, which are traditional specialties guaranteed, DSGs. These are different from geographical indications, but they also, in a way, protect the products' names. They designate products with for which there is a traditional recipe or a traditional production method. And so as currently we have only 78 names registered. Just to give you an indication of the sales number, according to a recent study, geographical indications and traditional specialties guaranteed together sales are estimated to be around 77 billion euros. So that represents 7% of the total food and drink sector. Second figure is the value of exports to non-EU countries, which is estimated to be at 17 billion euros, which represents 15% of the food and drink sector. Just to give you an idea, this is based on data from 2017. And I have put some pictures, and then you will recognize your famous PDO wine Chianti, which is just an example because you have many wines registered in Italy. Okay, so what is the context of a legislative proposal? Why is it taking place? So it all started with a strong message from our president, Ursula von der Leyen, who asked her services, the Commission services, to look at ways to strengthen the system of geographical indications so that our cultural, gastronomic, and local heritage is preserved and certified as authentic across the world. So this is where it all started. The legislative proposal has the following main goals. So first of all, the idea is to strengthen the existing EU system for geographical indications. So this is a system which is old and which functions well, which means that we are making adjustments to make it even stronger. So with this, we aim at increasing the uptake of geographical indications across the Union. Indeed, some member states have a little number of geographical indications. This is not the case for Italy, again. And we also aim at shortening the registration time to improve efficiency in general. So these are for the main goals. This Commission proposal was adopted on 31st of March 2022, almost 1 year ago. And I would like now to highlight the relevant Commission initiatives which are linked to our legislative proposal. And first of all, I will mention the Farm to Fork strategy, which is rather covering the agricultural angle of geographical indications. So in this strategy, we aim at strengthening the legislative framework on geographical indications, and where appropriate, and this is important, include specific sustainability criteria. This is one thing. The second thing about the Farm to Fork strategy is to strengthen the position of farmers and cooperatives and producer organizations in the food supply chain. So this concerns producers for products, including products with geographical indications, in fact, so all products. The second initiative I wanted to highlight is the Intellectual Property Action Plan, and this is rather covering the protection angle of geographical indications, where again the Commission will look at ways to strengthen, modernize, streamline, and better enforce the geographical indications for agricultural products. foods, wines, and spirits. So all the sectors again. And just to also briefly mention, just for your information, there is also currently an ongoing legislative proposal for non-agricultural products, which is led by another Directorate General of the Commission, which is DG Grow. So you have a bit the full picture. So this legislative proposal basically aims at harmonizing the rules across the sectors. While we had different regulations, we aim now at one single regulation with common provisions for procedures, for registration of a name, for amending and cancellation of existing product specifications. We also have, we are also proposing common provisions for the protection. And we have also common provisions for controls to a certain extent for spirit drinks and agricultural products. And here I would highlight that for control provisions, for wine, we will keep them separate. They will stay as they are currently laid down in the Common Market Organization, which is CMO abbreviated here. And this is the reason why this is due to the wine specificities, in fact. So now I will present you with the novelties. So this is where I will rather go quickly, but if you have questions afterward, feel free. So with this legislative proposal, we have in fact enlarged the scope, extending in fact to all agricultural products, which are according to World Trade Organization definition. So there will be new agricultural products added to what is currently in the list. Second, we will have the wine, the spirit drinks and agricultural products listed in the combined nomenclature of the common customs tariff. So basically, this is the document which is used for international trade. The second novelty is the sustainability element. So here, clearly the aim is to encourage the producers to adopt or further enhance their sustainable practices. You may know that in the Common Market Organization reform, which took place in December last year, there is already possibility to introduce a contribution of denominations to the sustainable development. So now with a legislative proposal, what we call the GI review, we go a step a bit further, and we specify that sustainability requirements must go beyond legal requirements, and they should be agreed by the producer group on a voluntary basis. So the voluntary approach is very much important here to emphasize. So, and if agreed, these sustainability requirements shall be laid down in the product specification. So while we are in line with the Common Market Organization current text, we go a bit further, and we hope that this will be a novelty that is much appreciated and makes a change. The second novelty is concerns the GI ingredient, where we propose that the agreement is needed from the concerned producer group when the geographical indication ingredient is used for the processing of a product. This agreement would be based on the 2/3 representativeness. Then we have the next novelty is the recognized producer group. This is a possibility, in fact, for member states authorities to designate a recognized producer group. So this would be this group would in fact have additional powers as compared to normal normal producer groups. Next novelty would be to have specific provisions for country code top level domain name registries. So this is very technical, but basically this means that this is to reinforce protection on internet sales. About GI symbols, which is the next element on my slide, we are simply confirming the flexible approach that we have for spirit drinks and for wines. That is that the EU logo is not obligatory, so producers may use the EU logo or may not use as they wish. So the text on the labeling on the logo was currently in the Common Market Organization text. So we now propose to have it in this single regulation. So this is the last slide about the novelties, where we propose to rely on the technical assistance from EWIPO. EWIPO is the European Union Intellectual Property Office, which is based in Alicante, Spain, with which we've had 5 years of cooperation already. So what we propose is to let EWIPO do a first examination of the files that we are receiving for registration of the names or amendments to product specifications, for example. And while the responsibility of the final decision for the file remains with the Commission. So this has proved efficient in the past, and we concluded that it would help shortening the scrutiny times. So that would be our proposal. About the GI certificate, the idea is to get the possibility for a producer on his request to have a GI certificate to in fact guarantee the GI production, but also to guarantee the authenticity of the product to the consumers. And we propose that this GI certificate is issued by the national authorities, and no fees are envisaged for this, for the producer. And the last one would be a proposal to have one single committee for geographical indications. So instead of the different ones that we currently have. And last, just a word about the traditional specialities guaranteed and the optional quality terms, which would stay in fact separate, because these are not geographical indications, so they will stay in this regulation, but separate still from geographical indications. Here, I would like to spend a bit more time on this slide because I know sustainability is a subject that is dear to this forum. And just to summarize that, indeed, there has been increasing societal concerns and consumer demand for sustainable products. This is for sure. And as I said, geographical indications are a rural intellectual property right tool, but they are also a tool for rural development. They are an important part of our culture. They contribute to social cohesion, to rural development, rural economy. They are also maintaining jobs or creating jobs in rural areas. So geographical indications in that respect is an appropriate vehicle for sustainability. So sustainability should be understood as the 3 dimensions, the social, well, starting, sorry, with the environmental sustainability, but also the social sustainability and economic sustainability. And to give you a bit more flavor, yes, indeed, GIs encourage the preservation of biodiversity. They also preserve the local savoir-faire or know-how and tradition. And also they help preserve the landscapes, which in turn may have a positive impact on tourism, such as you have, for example, wine routes which are being developed, since we are talking about wines more specifically. So to finish my presentation, I would like to say a few words about the timeline for the legislative proposal. As I said, the Commission adopted its proposal in March last year. Discussions are ongoing in the Parliament and the Council at the moment. And but the trilogues between the Parliament, Council, and the Commission will start soon, because they will start in spring. And finally, we expect possible adoption by the co-legislators by end of this year, and this is indicative timing. So I hope this gave you useful information about what's going on with the legislative proposal and the geographical indications. So thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie mille, Valérie.
Thank you so much, Valérie. Very clear presentation. I must say that in spite of the fact that your presentation may sound different from the first talk, I think they are not so different. There are two different ways of expressing the same thing. You have talked about the legislative aspects, while Professor Grandi spoke about the cultural and historical perspective, but basically you're talking about the same thing. So we have approached this topic from two different perspectives, but complementary. Thank you so much, Valérie. There will be questions later on, I believe, during the Q&A. And now we will move on. I'd like to hand it over to Matilde Poggi. Good evening, Matilde, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I called you a die-hard of our discussions on denominations. Please forgive me for this name, but you know, it's nice to see you again after the event in Milan last October. Without further ado, I'd like to ask you, Matilde, also in relation to what Valérie told us about what is going on in Europe. What is the situation like among the European winemakers, and what's the opinion of your association, the association that you chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele. CEVI represents 12 different, the winemakers of many European countries. We're small winemakers that make artisanal wines. Let me remind you that denominations of origin are at the center of the European wine production. Europe is the leading wine producers, and 2/3 of wine produced are denominations of origin, and mostly produced by medium to small vineyards. So the denominations of origin have an enormous value for us wine growers. And we can say is that these wines, when exported, have paid twice as much of wines without any denomination, the so-called generic wines. So we can say that without denominations of origin, the European winemaking industry wouldn't exist. And this, of course, distinguishes our system, which is a virtual system of denominations of origin. So the European system is distinguished from other countries that don't have such a regulated system managing denominations of origin. Valérie Dufour has already mentioned the role of the best agricultural practices and the role of economic sustainability that these denominations have on their own territories. Let me just tell you that for us wine growers, well, we are particularly affectionate to denominations of origin. the European countries represented within CEVI and the regulating systems are quite similar. There are two countries that don't have a similar system, which is the Czech Republic and Bulgaria. I'm talking about CEVI members. And the Czech Republic doesn't have denominations of origin. Bulgaria has two, one in the south and one in the north of the country. And that north-south split was put into place to help large dealers that could buy wines from larger areas. These two countries are quite backward compared to other countries, but through their ministers are now trying to implement a denomination system which is similar to our own. So there is a lot of widespread appreciation of the denomination system. Professor Grandi was right when he said that sometimes regulations do create some kind of constraints for us. And we need to be ready to change our regulations based on recent changes like the climate change, certain regulations whereby there should be a certain planting system, a given number of plants per hectare. With climate change, all these requirements become kind of obsolete, and regulations should become a little bit lighter and more flexible in taking changes on board. But we, independent European winemakers, are very worried about the reform presented by Valérie Dufour, because in the present situation, the wine is regulated by the CMO wine regulation. So the wine is the agri-food product which is most regulated in Europe, and that has to be stated very clearly. The reform, as presented by Valérie Dufour, states that from now on wine regulations will be two. There will be two of them, because some rules will still be in place within the CMO wine, whereas others will be included in a horizontal regulation related to all agri-food denominations of origin. So it will be both food and wines. More specifically, the horizontal regulation, which will relate to all denominations of origin, should include all the rules related to the management of protection of denominations, sustainability, and all the rules concerning producers' associations, whereas the CMO will still be related to controls, definition, traditional mentions, management of production volumes, and price indicators. This strategy seems to be quite dangerous to all of us, because it would deprive the wine of having one regulation or one regulatory framework, and everything would become more complicated. Everybody's asking for simplification and streamlining, but by acting in this way, there's no streamlining. In fact, everything gets more complicated and cumbersome, and probably even more expensive. We believe that the only correct way to protect wine denominations is the CMO wine, which has to be strengthened and better implemented. As to the role of WIPO, we are not happy if they get in charge of all the regulations, because WIPO is in charge of protecting intellectual property rights, but denominations are no private registered trademarks. Denominations are collective trademarks, are a crucial instrument of rural development policies, and they not only affect farmers and winemakers, but the whole territory that they work on and many other economic stakeholders. So they can contribute to increase competitiveness of our businesses. So we believe that WIPO could play the following role, of course, based on their competencies, because they have no farming competencies, whereas the DG Agri has a lot of agricultural knowledge. So WIPO should be in charge of managing the names of domains and the web protection of the names of denominations, because we know that sometimes there are domains recollecting denomination names, or they try and introduce names of protected denominations into their internet domain. So over and above that, and I think that WIPO here could play a relevant role, we believe that producers and winemakers should be listened to, because we are the main stakeholders in the denominations arena. So over and above the protection of names and domains, we don't think there can be any other role that can be performed by WIPO. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Matilde, for this very concise and clear presentation, for being so clear in expressing your position as well as that of CEVI. And also thank you for providing your personal and CEVI's opinion on Valerie's presentation. So I think there are questions coming in, and so the time has come for me to introduce the next speaker, Iacopo di Teodoro. Thank you very much for joining us today. Iacopo can certainly bring an additional approach, a different way to look at this topic. Iacopo is a wine distributor in the United States, so he's a dealer and has plays an important cultural role as well. That you know, in the US, the approach to denominations is totally different from Europe. We know that in the United States, the legislation is totally different, if not the opposite of the European legislation on this matter. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to you, Iacopo, and then we'll certainly able to take many questions on many different topics. Over to you, Iacopo.
Sì, hai già detto I due punti
Thank
importanti.
you for your introduction, Gabriele. Thanks, everybody. Well, you already mentioned the most important things. One is that the US market is very important for Italian wine. And then you said something very important, which is the different perspective. Because, you know, I was born and in Europe. I grew up in Europe, though I have lived in New York for 17 years, and I partly live in California as well. So we experience the issue of denominations in a different way. In the United States, you know, they have a totally different concept. Being the last one to speak, I thought of many ideas on account of what Professor Grandi, Valérie, and Matilde have said. I will try and follow my order, but I will add some more insights. First of all, I am in favor of denominations. To me, denominations are absolutely important, let alone as a wine marketing tool. I will tell you also why denominations are important even more for the future. In the United States, denominations have generated interest in wine. I was saying that I'm, an importer. I partner with Artisanal Cellars on the East Coast, and I have another partner on the West Coast. I've lived here for 17 years. I've seen the moment when there was a booming of Italian products and culture in the US, and this was thanks to the denominations. When I came here, the wine was based on the varieties, Cabernet, for example, Chardonnay, and maybe some more. But there are still restaurants which have this approach, this traditional American approach. But the fact of appellation, of denomination, has grown or has led to a growth in the knowledge of wines everywhere. Michelangeli spoke of biodynamics. You all know this person, but this idea was meant to link the product to a territory. If a Sauvignon comes from Napa Valley, from Friuli, or from elsewhere, you have to make reference to the area of origin. In Italy, but you can also talk about French wines, Austrian wines, etc. Well, in Italy, many small denominations were given an advantage because of the denominations, because, the winemakers, even small ones, started going abroad. And, in restaurants, for example, or shops, even in remote areas, you would find wines which were completely unknown before. They were only known within 50 kilometers from the producer, not so far away. This was very important from a marketing standpoint, but it was also important for increasing awareness of the products worldwide. Just an example, I like taking a historic perspective of the last 20 years. I have very nice memories when we started doing blind tasting with colleagues from the industry. We were young, maybe we were saying bullshit as well, but, the new Barbaresco came out and, people said, oh, that's cool, that's nice. There was interest thanks to denominations and also thanks to subzones, but this is something we can discuss later. This was very important in the growth of wine. The title of this webinar has much to do with the credibility of denominations. And the speakers before me touched upon these points. Well, credibility. If I'm not wrong, Professor Grandi said that we have too many denominations and this affects credibility. And also, sometimes denominations are too loose. so to say. I usually play with my students and I say, I offer you a glass of Sancerre or Chianti, and you can't say thank you or no thank you. You know, within the same denomination, you can have a wonderful wine or a German discount wine. Because of commercial reasons, maybe the denominations were a bit too loose and too generous. As Professor Grandi said, maybe there were all too many denominations because of political reasons, because of a political group, and this creates confusion. You know, we are in the business and we know what we're talking about, but denominations must protect the consumers. This is most important because consumers, you know, are confused. At the end of 2022, we have 341 PDOs and also many DOCGs. This may create confusion. Politically, this is difficult to examine. There are interests involved. Professor Grandi was talking about some denominations. He was saying that some denominations are more difficult to handle because of large volumes. It is also true that we should consider the history, the historical developments. Well, this is not the place to discuss this, but we may think of denominations which are very small, but they refer to a very specific identity and they have to be protected. At Slow Food, for example, you have always focused on protecting these small denominations. Carema, for example, is a very small denomination, but with lots of specificities linked to the climate, to the traditional history, so that DOC has to exist. But the problem was abusing of the DOCs. I see this everywhere. We talked about wine. I'm in the board of the Italian group of importers and restaurant owners. You know, we have to protect Parmigiano cheese versus Parmesan. This still makes me cry. I was at the board last week and I can tell you that, you know, Italian is a very much abused of word in the United States. We were talking about tiramisu and tiramisu denomination. Well, I would like to protect not only products, but also recipes, at least the historical ones. You know, if you go to a very expensive restaurant in New York, you see how the name Italian is very much abused of, let alone in Kansas City, for example, and their restaurants. So I believe denominations are indeed important. It's important also to consider that denominations have to be protected also for the future. We spoke about natural wines. I'm in favor of such wines. They respect the identity of an area. They are clean wines. They should be organic at the least. You know, Here we have received natural wine with no organic certification from unknown producers with a cartoon label, 3 young people dressed like Superman, for example, saying just red wine with no area specification. And the new generations, I mean, those in their 20s, are very confused. I'm not a sociologist. I don't want to talk about the Instagram generation, but they have a new superhero. This generation has a new superhero every day. Therefore, there is lack of understanding of the products. You know, in the past, you would have a specific preference for a denomination or for a producer. This is not the case anymore. Because of lack of denomination, we may lose customers and consumers. I see this very well here in the United States, which is a little bit at the extreme. The AVA is also very generous and very loose. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they said that Tocalon, one of their Grand Crus, was abused of, as if, you know, I had a Busia handkerchief and would call myself Busia. It's a nonsense. I think we have to protect areas, the local areas. There are people working on this also among the new generations of winemakers producing natural and clean wine. Didri Ikin from Garagista is a person that I like very much. She's in the natural wine business in Vermont, a completely new area. She has worked to create a new area, so perhaps in 10, 20 years there will be Vermont denominations as well. When she speaks of areas, she speaks of her own area, of the soil and climate there. Unfortunately, in these new producer groups, there are still too many people who are of concern to me. I'm worried. In Utah, for example, you may buy grapes from Santa Barbara and produce a generic table wine. That's of concern to me. I'm worried because of this. I think we have to protect the origin and the identity of the places of origin, and the DOC, for example, is a tool for this. Well, I have thought of some ideas before, but I see there are only 6 minutes for Q&A, so please, maybe we can take some questions now. Thank you. Thank you so much, Iacopo. Iacopo's was the fourth and last presentation, providing us with interesting insights from a different perspective. I think there are some questions. I will read some. You can also ask questions in Italian, because there is a translation service, and I might instead make mistakes in translating myself, says Gabriele. One first question to our speakers is related to what Iacopo said. You know, we have seen the comparison between the United States and Italy and Europe. The question is, We know that the American approach to denominations is different from the European one. In the US, the current IP system, sorry, I lost the question, says the speaker, but through trademarks and collective certifications, well, they think they have enough. So there is a sort of clash between stakeholders and Europe on the global market. It's an observation, it's a comment rather than a question, but maybe you can comment. Maybe Iacopo, you can start answering this point. Well, it's really difficult. It's not something we can cover in 5 minutes only. The example I gave you before, I mentioned Carema, is historic and perhaps I would say anti-democratic. A producer of a certain appellation could say, why Carema? There are historic reasons linked to the protection of products. At worldwide level, denominations were created differently from ours, but, you know, there are historic reasons because we're talking about areas that have produced wine for many, many years, France, Italy, for example. So I'm in favor of protecting these names. Some denominations may change over time. They shouldn't be crystallized. The Chianti DOCGs have changed their production rules and specifications several times. I think there should be one clear point to follow, which is being clear towards our consumers. This is our Northern Star. We have to provide parameters reflecting the type of production we have implemented for many years. Maybe we can change something in the denominations, but they have to be kept as they are, I believe. Thank you. Thank you so much, Iacopo. Just one point I would like to add. You know, rather than being more rigid, being stricter in creating new denominations, we should focus on the existing ones, for example, with sub-denominations. Barolo, 183 MGAs were created. You have seen the pyramid of the 11 municipalities and all the MGAs which have been used since 87. You know, Barolo has its own history, but perhaps we could extend this to other denominations rather than thinking of new denominations. You know, clarity is very important for the world market. Many years ago, I worked within a DOC which was Monte Scudaio. They had a great potential, but they didn't exploit it because, you know, when you were traveling with the Italian Trade Commission everywhere in the world, there was no consistency. You know, they would say, I only do Vermentino because I'm along the coastline. I only do Sangiovese, I only do Cabernet, I only do Trebbiano. So journalists and consumers had no idea what Montescudaio was. If there is consistency among producers, if there is a precise style, you know, when you take Barolo throughout the world, there are different styles, but one knows what Barolo is. You know what you're talking about when you talk about Barolo. Thank you, Iacopo. There are some questions to Valérie Dufour. The first question is about UIPO. At the recent Agri-Fish Council, some member states opposed involving UIPO and also the European Parliament. So what shall we do? This is one first question. And then the second question is, are you sure that UIPO will have sufficient technical instruments, for example, in the agricultural field, in order to deal with applications for new IGs or GIs? Thank you, Valérie.
Yes, thank you, Gabriele, and the participants for the questions. About EUIPO, I heard Matilde's presentation very with great attention, and it is true the wine sector in particular is, but not only the wine sector, in fact, all sectors seem to be opposed to the involvement of EUIPO in the for providing the Commission with technical assistance. This is being discussed indeed. What I can tell you is that we did an impact assessment ahead of the legislative proposal. That means before drafting the proposal. And what we analyze is that indeed, with the involvement of EUIPO, we reduce the registration time, so the processing of the files by 1/3, if I remember well. So that was very significant. Now I understand that participants suggest that they do not have expertise in agricultural field. There I can tell you that we have trained them, we give them capacity building, explaining what a geographical indication is. We have also reviewed the examination, so they really have now built on this to provide a good initial assessment. And as I said, the Commission retains the final decision. So this means that we are still having a look at the file before taking the decision to either register or reject. Also, I would like to mention that in any case, there is we have market units in DG Agri. So, for example, we have a wine market unit. We also have market units dealing with food sector and spirit drinks. So, which means that when we have a request for registration of a wine name, we systematically consult the wine market unit for the expertise in the wine field, so that they can give us their opinion on the technical aspects of the file. So in any case, this consultation from the market unit will stay. So this is maybe an element to reassure you that how things are proposed to go on. Maybe I still forgot something. Yes, the discussions in the in the Agri-Fish councils. Indeed, we are aware, of course, that involvement of EUIPO is not well perceived, and at this moment in time, we are still in the discussions, as I said, and the trilogues will start. So I think we can count on further discussions and during the trilogues to see what changes might be brought. But if I may say another word about, if I may say a word to respond also to Matilde, who expressed herself earlier, and also other participants. The wine rules, in fact, indeed, they are in the Common Market Organization regulation, the CMO. What we are in fact proposing is only to move the part on the procedures from CMO regulation to the single regulation legislative proposal now. So we are not touching on the wine specificities. They will remain in the CMO regulation. So this is for us not so much a problem. It's even maybe something to think of for the challenges of the future, because if wine is integrated in a single regulation with other products, agricultural products and spirit drinks products, this can make the position on geographical indications stronger in the future, if you see what I mean, or should I be more explicit? I don't know. But again, discussion in progress. So I think we can trust the decisional of the legislative process to come to a suitable compromise, and I hope, and we hope, possible adoption by end of 2023, which I think was also a question in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Valérie. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but we have we can take a couple more questions. One, well, I would address it to Matilde. Because she's a winemaker and knows about winemaking with different varieties. Because the question is, what's your position about the introduction of hybrid resistant varieties, the so-called PIWI, within classical denominations? And I would ask my own question to Professor Grandi. So we have sort of a overall approach to the issue. Do you think that the denomination system can somehow have a positive impact in terms of increasing streamlining and simplification, as we call it, especially in a system where we try not to multiply regulations in a never-ending way? Do you think there can be a starting point to improve the overall setup? So these are the two questions. The first one for Matilde, the second one for Alberto. Thank you very much, Gabriele. Yes, I have to say that within the European Confédération of Independent Winemakers, we don't have a shared position on PIWI. Well, of course, there are different countries within the association. We know that our French colleagues would agree on having resistant hybrid varieties, 5% acceptable within denominations of origin, whereas in Italy, well, the Italian Federation hasn't reached a well-defined position. Then we have Eastern European countries where the situation is quite different from our own, and they haven't reached an opinion about it. Slovenia might be on the same line as we are, but we have no official position yet on this matter. What I can say is that resistant varieties, many of them are hybrid varieties originated from French varieties. So the possibility of planting them out in different areas is not really simple at all, because sometimes they tend to develop too much alcohol, especially in this period with global warming and climate change. The risk exists of having to harvest very early, to harvest the grapes very early. So these varieties are not suitable for all climates. Thank you, Matilde. Alberto, over to you. The question is extremely challenging, really difficult. But it's very much in line with my personal interest. I'd like to rephrase your question. over and above the technicalities that I'm not familiar yet, how can we actually streamline the process? I have a personal doubt and fear somehow. If we make the process too simple, this kind of certification, let's call it that way, I think we could run the risk of causing another problem upstream. Let me explain. With the denomination system, we're trying to do something impossible sometimes, not always, of course, but we're trying to put together the mass and the niche market. And so with the denomination, we're trying to have a kind of reward in terms of pride and quality, while at the same time expanding enormously the market. So these two requirements don't live well together. You either have a mass consumption product or a niche product. If you make that process too easy, you're running the risk of getting entangled in many different things, and so it's a slippery slope, and the denomination could be devalued. You can put the Ferrari horse on a Panda car, but that will never become a Ferrari. And so that's the point. We shouldn't run that risk of trying to turn a Panda into the Ferrari. Of course, I have no technical knowledge about the streamlining process, but that's the risk that I see. Of course, I'm very much of a European supporter. I do trust European institutions, and I'm sure this danger will be dispelled, but it does exist. The more we streamline, the more dangerous it gets. I hope my answer is being clear enough. I'm good at asking questions, but not good at answering them. Yes, absolutely. Yes, that was my point. I've been able to elicit the answer I was looking for. Well, I'm about to come to the end of the session. Unfortunately, we cannot take any more questions. Please let me inform you that in your Zoom chat, there is a link to a poll or a survey. So it's a feedback survey about our work. I'd like to thank our attendants, very many. In fact, I'd like to thank the organizers and promoters and those behind the scenes that kept contacts with emails and calls and everything. They've done an amazing job. I'd like to thank all the speakers. I'd like to thank Alberto Grandi, Valérie Dufour, Matilde, Poggi, Iacopo, Teodoro. I think it's been an enormously useful opportunity for all of us to talk about this very topic. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. Arrivederci, and thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye. Thank you.